So it's like we have to buy from this vendor, has to be this spec because we can't accommodate anything else. It's like you definitely can, and you can utilize it better and more effectively, and you can collect the data points that allow you to make better decisions. But I think the procurement cycle is still a bit broken. So I think the next massive change for business is understanding circular economy for product life extension, for reuse, for recycling, for refurbishment, and understanding how they can facilitate that in their organizations. And we're helping governments do that, and we're helping large companies do that, because the benefits of embracing the circular economy are massive, and IT teams and managers that don't do that are going to get really badly left behind. Hi, it's Rich Kenny from Interact, and you're watching the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast.
Welcome, data center friends. It's Joshua Feinberg from the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast, and I'm thrilled to be welcoming a very special guest here today. I'm welcoming Rich Kenny, who is Managing Director of Interact in the UK. Welcome to the podcast, Rich.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I think a great place to start would be, could you give me a little bit of your background of how you ended up leading a consultancy focusing on decarbonization and sustainability and digital infrastructure? Is that something you've always thought about when you were younger, or is this something that came to you along the way within your career?
I was always into computers and IT as a kid, but actually when I went to uni, I ended up doing economics and politics, specializing in poverty alleviation. So my role led me to go straight into working for technical assistance on a macroeconomic scale. So looking at big problems and how to make them less of a problem, but it was more dealing with people than it was with the IT and solutions and things like that. So I ended up getting into sort of ops roles and looking after the human aspect of business. And after about sort of 10 or 15 years of doing that, I got into more digitally focused problems. And that led me eventually to a refurbisher at TechBuyer, where I worked for 7 years there, helping sort of strengthen circular economy within the UK. Primarily through IT, so product life extension, reuse, assets, things like that. So really getting down to the nitty gritty of hardware. How do you make products last longer? How do you make them more performant? How do you keep them in use longer? And what's the environmental and beneficial impacts of that? And it was while I was at TechBuyer that we did a research project into IT performance over time, and that led us to creating Interact. And that's how I get started. So a bit of a twisty, turny sort of pathway, but straight into the computers, really.
It's super fascinating, because my degree also was in economics, and at the time it seemed very theoretical, but there's been a surprising amount of case studies and lessons learned that I think about way back when on things like speeds on highway, hospital utilization rates, simple supply and demand that help understand the dynamics of IT. And it's super interesting too to see that it came about from IT hardware and refurbishing and extending the life of hardware that led you along this journey, because so much of what we see with hardware is often driven by replacement cycles. For years, it was Microsoft driving when people wanted a new version of Windows and applications. But yeah, it's been a little bit of a change as we've moved to the cloud. Yeah,
I think the product life extension and the benefits to business from economic, environmental, and social impact points of view has kind of strengthened the secondary market. So like I said, everything used to be buy new because it's the smart thing to do. And now it's like, don't buy new. That's not the smart thing to do. There's a million different things to look at. And I think like what you said about economics, you look at the factors of production, right? You look at what it takes to make something. And I think that's really served me well in my career in circular economy, because you go, when you pay £300 for a laptop or £1,000 for a laptop, it's just a pure economic transaction. But when you dig deeper and say, well, what's the environmental impact in the creation of that? What critical raw materials does it use? You kind of get this whole life view of a product on what it takes to make something that isn't just what I paid for it and the value that I've placed on it in pounds, but you see the whole value of what does this cost the earth? What does it cost from a social and environmental point of view? And I think applying that to data centers is kind of a big logical step, because a data center is just a building for housing computers. So if you can start to understand how do you make the computers perform better to extend that product life, you do the exact same thing with the buildings, and what you have is a whole view of what the data center industry is using, taking, and providing to do a proper cost-based analysis. What am I getting for my pound of compute, my use of a watt, my use of water, what digital services are the data centers providing? And that balance on is it a good investment or not is, I think, crucial for the industry. Is what are we giving people and what are we costing? Because it isn't just pounds and pence and dollars and cents. It's water, it's eutrophication, it's a million other things. So we need to make sure that what we're providing makes that a good investment for the planet and for our stakeholders.
Yeah, it's fascinating. That's where we come back full circle again to economics. Because if I think about going back earlier in our careers, total cost of ownership is nothing new to IT directors, but they weren't taking into account these externalities of what, because these costs were being shifted to taxpayers, were being shifted to the public and being shifted to consumers. And that is just last 3, 4, 5 years we learned has been totally not sustainable.
Yeah, it's a classic negative externality, right? Or what's it called? Free rider bias.
Yes.
They're like, I'm not paying for it, therefore it doesn't exist. It's like, but your tax dollars pay for it, so you do pay for it. If you want clean water, you have to pay for it. If you want green space and a lack of pollution, you have to pay for it. And it comes through tax dollars and other mechanisms. So, yeah, building that into the total cost of ownership discussion, I think, is the maturity of the market. And I think that thinking is really crucial on how we understand how AI is driving data center consumption, because we need to do the same thing for the next stage of data center 4.0 or 5.0, where we've gone past like we're providing digital bridges and infrastructure to we're now providing AI services and they're really power hungry. Is that a good return on investment? Like, is the number of pictures I want to make on Midjourney or the content I want GPT to write for me worth the energy cost? Because it appears to be free financially, but it isn't. And so we need to build that appropriate TCO model into all our decision making. And it's not just data center, it's every industry, right? It's sewage, it's water, it's power, it's transportation. That addition of the world and the environment as a stakeholder is a massive part of the next stage of economic policy.
Yeah, and I don't think people are even putting 2 and 2 together with all this. I saw a post on LinkedIn about a week or 2 ago talking about how a typical generative AI search, whether it's Gemini or Copilot, uses 10 times more energy than a Google search. And sure, people love generative AI because it saves a ton of time having to click through on the 10 blue links and figure out what's really going on, but it's 10 times more energy.
Mm. Yeah, saying something like your average sort of half-hour use of something like ChatGPT is enough to charge 7 electric cars. Just asking it questions and being inane with it and not generating anything useful. It's about that balance, isn't it, of what should we be using things for? And it's exactly the same with IT hardware, using the right hardware to solve the right problems. It's tools and toolkits. Generative AI is a tool in a toolkit, and if it's the only tool you've got a problem. But if it's one that complements others, it's a really big benefit to the world used in the right way. But used for everything, it's a very, very power hungry waste of time. So it's TCO discussions every single time, total cost of ownership, return on investment.
So, Rich, when I was learning a little bit more about your background, I saw that you do some work at the London South Bank University. So I imagine people early on in their career, students are probably approaching you quite often for career advice. Given that, what would you say to someone that's really curious about what you've done working at the intersection of IT hardware, sustainability, recycling, and now policy around this, that wanted to get into this line of work?
Yeah, it's I've always said, like, find something that interests you and become a subject matter expert in it. So at university, you're still in that structured learning environment. And I'm a research fellow at LSBU. I sit on the board of what is called our local enterprise partnerships for my region to encourage green skills job development. And every time we go through it, we look at what happens after structured learning. So after you finish school or college or university, you're still on a pathway of this is how you're going to learn. To kind of get into the next career step, it's self-learning. It's always self-learning, an ability to learn and self-motivate. And what you'll find is that the data center industry has a million different pathways and a million different solutions that need solving. So align your interests to something in the industry and there'll be a really good career for you. And that's what I tell the university students. It's like, be curious, find what makes you tick. And I'm not saying do what you're passionate about. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is be passionate about what you do. So if you decide that you're going to work in economics or social care or power, it doesn't mean it has to be your reason for being, but you should put everything into it and become as good as you possibly can, because the more effort you put into something, whether it's physical effort, or whether it's an emotional commitment, or whether it's like just commitment to learning, education, and effort, that will create opportunities. And I've always been a man that says, when an opportunity is there, I want to be able to take it. And so the best way to do that is to be ready for every opportunity. And there was a really, I don't know if you ever read Malcolm Gladwell's book on outliers, where it was about the concept of 10,000 hours to become an expert. What that actual book was not about becoming an expert in 10,000 hours. It was making sure you've got the 10,000 hours of expertise in, so that when an opportunity knocks, you can accept it. Because without that expertise, the opportunity will pass you by. And the whole book is about how timing is pretty much everything. So you have to be ready. And that's how I feel about the career progression. Most of the jobs we do now won't exist in the future, and most of the jobs of the future don't exist right now. So to make the most of future opportunities and the direction of travel, you have to be ready. And so that means learning really important, what used to be called soft skills, and now I just refer to as high value skills, things like communication, like motivation, like organization. These skills alongside empathy will make you good for anything you want to do. So find something that tickles your pickle, and then learn as much as you can about it, work with people to learn what they can learn, and then you'll be ready for anything.
Yeah, it's no big secret that there's a talent shortage in the data center industry. And most people, when they go to conferences, look around the room, you're like, ooh, there's a lot of people here, a big percentage of people that are in the later stages of their career. What's going to be in this industry 10 years out or so? And people are starting to think about how to reinvent the recruiting. And there's some great grassroots efforts to get out to high schools and colleges to talk about these careers. But how do you fix this? I mean, and you're right, there's so many different facets of this industry. I came into this through IT services, IT consulting, managed services. And for the first year or two I was around this industry, I had very little understanding of the facility side. I don't think I even know what a decommissioning or commissioning company did for the first year or two I was hanging around co-location businesses. How do you solve this? It almost seems like you need someone to take a hop on, hop off tour of the data center industry, or go on like a theme park tram ride to get a brief overview of the 5 or 6 different sectors and the dozens of different businesses that touch this industry.
I think the biggest issue with the data center sector is that it's been built on secrecy. Like, there's been this concept that we can't admit where a data center is because of security. And this overall blanket statement of security means we can't tell you anything about a data center because it's so secure. And, I think we all know that's a bit shenanigans, really. Like, they hold data and it's very important, but, you probably could use that thing to say you shouldn't tell people where a care home is because there's loads of vulnerable elderly people that could be taken advantage of. I think once you demystify the data center into what it is, it's a building that houses IT that serves digital infrastructure, then you align of what business functions that requires. Because a data center company requires marketing, it requires electrical engineering, it requires sales, it requires physical work, IT skills. All these standard job roles that exist in every other industry still exist in the data center sector. But when people hear data center, they think engineer doing very complicated things with networks and servers, and we shouldn't touch all that sort of stuff. It's very, very important. It's very, very very, very like technically difficult. It's not true. What it is it's very secretive, and we kind of keep it closed. The best way to attract the talent into the industry is to open up the industry and show people what's there. Exactly like you said, a hop on, hop off tour. Go to a data center. I've been to thousands. And when you go to a data center, they all look pretty similar. And it's like, it's pretty noisy. Everything's in cabinets. And there's a lot of computers stacked on top of each other, fundamentally. Like, the thing around that is that they need lots of things to support them, like any ecosystem, like any system of systems. So there's a role for everybody in the data center, but people need to be aware what that term is, what data center is, what that terminology looks like. And like I said, it's demystifying it, make it straightforward, make it simple. And there's some really great initiatives in the UK that I'm aware of, and in Europe around skills acquisition, rising stars programs. The Data Center Alliance in the UK does loads of stuff around getting sort of first stage graduates into careers in data center that aren't thinking about it. We see them at careers fairs. There's great university programs. And what was interesting was I was at the House of Lords this week for the UK Net Zero event. So that was the sort of 50 most influential people in Net Zero for UK were invited to have a discussion on what the future of Net Zero looks like for the UK. And out of the 3 key speakers that were talking, two of them mention data center as critical infrastructure and part of our solution for net zero. If you went something like that a few years ago, if it even existed, they certainly wouldn't have been talking about data centers to an audience of social impact people and environmentalists. So the understanding that data center is going to underpin the next 10 years of evolution in services, it's understood at every level, from ministerial down to sort of, junior level. So I think this awareness of data center as an industry is only going to help improve the career pathways into it. So yeah, I think we're on the right path, if I'm honest. I just think we need to work a little bit harder to be open and transparent about what it looks like and what careers are in the data center sector.
Yeah, there's been two headlines in mainstream business and financial news over the past year or two that have been very data center related, because historically data centers would only hit these news outlets a couple times a year when one of the larger REITs would report their public earnings. But now, thanks to NVIDIA and Jensen Huang and the crazy appreciation of that part of the equity markets, it seems almost every day there's news stories related to this.
The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com.
And then there's the flip side of this too, with what's going to happen when 50% of our neighbors are driving EVs and all of the data centers have high density, high compute. Mm-hmm. And we're competing for, is there going to be any grid power left?
Yeah, and I think what we've got there is that the data center is a perfect example of how systems of systems work. To facilitate data centers, you need network, you need communications, you need water, you need all these other facilities. And that's the same as how you run a country, right? You need every system to work together and work effectively. So, you can't power data centers if you've got loads of electronic vehicles. It's like, well, if you've got loads of electronic vehicles, you probably can't keep all the lights on all the businesses either. So your number one thing to address is grid capacity, right? And there's very few people that understand the impact of grid capacity on operations like data center engineers do, right? When you go like, if you don't have enough power, these things don't turn on and they don't stay cold and then they set on fire. That's kind of like quite a simple quid pro quo for how data centers work. Yeah. Businesses don't have that understanding of how they rely on interrelated services. So data centers are a really good model for how to, I guess, sort of make a step change in infrastructure on a countrywide scale, like investment in network, investment in power, and how that looks. I mean, in the UK, we're looking towards centralizing national power again, so we can have enough for everybody. And that conversation is leading to data centers that were getting rejected, having another bite at the apple, going, well, there should be enough power. Like, why isn't there enough power? Power is constrained, so we just need to make sure there's more of it. So I think they're kind of, it was initially like data centers bad, it uses power, to, once again, the total cost of ownership piece. It's going to use power. What's it providing for that? And if it's providing self-driving cars that allow old people to go to the shops, if it's providing digital services that massively improve cancer detection rates in hospitals through AI, and all these things are powered by underpinning digital infrastructure, it becomes a much better conversation around what am I getting for my energy dollar, when you say, well, you're getting a massive improvement in productivity, you're getting a step change in how we deal with medical and healthcare, we're improving social care, we're improving livelihoods and social impact globally. We just need to quantify that as a data center sector and say, so that's what you're getting for your energy. So make sure there's enough power for it. Because if you want more self-driving cars, that's cool. And if you want more electronic vehicles, that's also cool. But you're probably going to need more data centers too, because a lot of our services are going to depend on those centralized or edge-based deployments.
So when I think about that, I think about Google, and Google's an interesting organism ecosystem to look at in and of itself, as both one of the huge hyperscalers that uses an enormous amount of grid power, but they also have some interesting consumer facing tools that are providing some transparency that didn't exist a couple of years ago. Like, for example, when you look at Google Maps and you look at Google Flights, both tells you now on a relative basis which flights are better, which routes are better to take. With that in mind, are there other types of applications where you could see that playing out in digital infrastructure?
Yeah, I mean, Google Maps is a great example because I use it every single time I go to a new city to try and find where I'm going. Like it's completely revolutionized the way that we engage with travel. You know, it's opened up a whole load of opportunities. But I think the big changes for us around AI and apps and usage are going to be how we centralize them into services for everybody. I think the big change, I think the big sort of apps for AI in the future will be initially social impact related through healthcare. I honestly do. I've seen some really, really good research coming out of leading universities around, like I said, early cancer detection. You know, I've seen some great stuff getting deployed into the NHS at the moment around breast cancer screening that, you know, does the work of like 2 doctors that can then, and it's not a matter of replacing people, it's a matter of these apps being able to have the same accuracy rate of predicting abnormal conditions that doctors can do, but saving 2 doctors of time, which allows them to do operations and reduce waiting lists and improve livelihoods for the people they're working with. So a lot of AI, I think we need to get it away from it being like these fun products that people can do nice things with, and, you know, it makes transcribing text easier and it does this and that, to how do we actually make a planetary impact on making lives better. And I think with the right applications, we can do some wonderful, wonderful things in the near term. And it's going to be powered by digital infrastructure. So that's we just got to roll that in. We've got to figure out how we're going to make AI have the same sort of usage that Google Maps and flight mechanisms have for optimizing journeys for other aspects of your life. And I think the first big one is healthcare, because it will be the clearest business case for return on investment from happiness to energy spend. I think that's a huge one. On an individual basis, I mean, I don't use many AI apps, if I'm honest. I kind of, you know, there's not a whole lot that really fascinates me with it, but the next evolution of it as it becomes more mainstream is really interesting. I just have a few issues with AI around the ethical nature of how it's getting data and how it's collecting and what it's collecting and how it's using it. And I think we're coming to a point now with AI where it's becoming synonymous with good, but it's also becoming synonymous with potential issues. And I think as we're seeing the likes of sort of Microsoft and Apple step away from open AI boards now and going, well, we don't really want big tech influencing AI anymore, I think that's really positive, because of what that will hopefully lead to is ethical AI that is solving problems, but going about it the right way, rather than traditional Silicon Valley approach to everything, which is steamroll it and ask for forgiveness later on. We can't do that with AI, because by the time you've taken all the data, you're already in a lot of trouble if you can't validate how you got access to all the rest of it. And I think we could see something big change coming quite soon around the ethical impacts of AI. But regardless of how it works, AI is going to be integrated into our society, and it's going to be powered by data centers. So we do have to kind of figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, it's not even close to the impact. But when I think about the kind of technology problems that have existed that seemed unsolvable at first, I think about streaming music 20 years ago, where everyone was demonizing Napster. And within 10 years, there were solutions to deal with the intellectual property. And a lot of the artists weren't thrilled with the initial solutions, but there were solutions, and they've evolved and industries changed and remade themselves over time. I wouldn't be surprised in observing this over the last 2 decades or so of my career if a lot of the innovation around figuring out the business models and regulations started in the EU and then filtered out to the rest of the world. But yeah, for sure that it's going to be a period of change.
Yeah, and the thing is, if you create something that's useful, you just need to make sure it's usable. So if there's some, you know, so if that's a legal issue, if that's an ethical issue, if that's a technical issue, they'll just be solved if there's a value there, right? If as long as there's a value statement, there's a reason to solve that problem. And I think AI is there. I think it has so many great use cases. But what we'll see is, I think a lot of the AI for the sake of AI will just drop out, because I think it will become quite damaging to lean on that without all the supporting structures and legalities around it. And so I think we'll see a lot of the pointless AI disappear, and all the really useful stuff, I think, will find its way, like you said.
Rich, when you look out at the IT industry throughout the UK and more broadly through Europe and on a global basis, what do you think is the biggest mistake that other leaders are making when it comes to how they look at carbon reduction and the circular economy?
I think they don't look at product extension appropriately. I don't think they do. The most businesses are still stuck in that buy and move cycle. So buy the latest and greatest, then get rid of it. I think when you start building in what the embodied carbon and the critical raw material impact is on buying new, and you start building that into the cost, people will want to extend their products for longer, and that will significantly decrease the environmental and cost impact of procurement. I still see it all the time. I worked with over 400 data centers in the last 3 years with Interact, and there's significant opportunities to decrease carbon and cost, but the risk attitude is weighed far too much to 10 years ago. So it's like, we have to buy from this vendor, has to be this spec because we can't accommodate anything else. It's like, you definitely can, and you can utilize it better and more effectively, and you can collect the data points that allow you to make better decisions. But I think the procurement cycle is still a bit broken. So I think the next massive change for business is understanding circular economy for product life extension, for reuse, for recycling, for refurbishment, and understanding how they can facilitate that in their organizations. And we're helping governments do that, and we're helping large companies do that, because the benefits of embracing the circular economy are massive, and IT teams and managers that don't do that are going to get really badly left behind. So yeah, for me, it's circular economy just needs to be mainstream business.
And you're right. I think about how earlier on in my career, actually, the first formal IT job that I had in college was working for 2.5 years for IBM, helping to promote higher education technology. And at that time, there was the quote, "Nobody ever got fired for buying IBM." And of course, IBM hasn't been in that kind of hardware business in decades, but Lenovo, kind of the first cousin of that, for sure is. So yeah, I think about like marketplaces. Someone's going to look at procuring hardware to marketplaces. Do you envision a time where you're going to see that kind of transparency on carbon footprint and carbon impact of purchasing servers, purchasing GPUs, storage space, UPS units?
Yeah. And I think it'll be the next 18 months. The next big thing for data centers, obviously, the Energy Efficiency Directive in Europe, where it's now asking you to quantify the ITEE number, which is the IT energy efficiency number, to quantify how many transactions you get per watt of energy for all your configurations. The fact that that hasn't been a mandatory requirement before is an absolute game changer, because now you need to say, how's your IT getting more efficient over time? And your response can't be naturally through buying new stuff. It's going to be like, are you looking at your applications? Are you looking at your utilization? Are you looking at your IT to make sure it's configured effectively for you? And that ITEE figure, that energy efficiency figure, tracked over time, will tell you if you're getting better. And it's relatively straightforward to get if you've got the right tools. But if you're not using it as your North Star metric for how are we improving environmentally and performance-wise, that's going to be an absolute game changer. And that reporting on that started already. The first actual reports will be in 2024, 2025 on data center IT energy efficiency. And I think it's going to tell a really interesting story when people look at that figure and go, it's 7,000 ops per watt. Good is 15,000. Why are we so bad? And that will lead to large scale efficiency transformations. And that's what we do. We obtain the ITE figure and go, do you know you could make this 3 times more efficient for every unit of energy? And it's just going to save you millions of dollars and thousands of tons of carbon. And once people actually have that measure and work on it, I think it's going to change the way people look at IT from a procurement, from a management, from a decommissioning, from a maintenance point of view. They're going to be like, I need that figure to improve when I carry out a project. If it doesn't, that project doesn't make sense. And that I think is going to transform the industry.
Yeah, for sure. And I think about, like, on a tactical basis, imagine there's different kinds of companies and organizations that engage your services through Interact. When you look at the industry, what categories of companies and what kinds of stakeholders do you think are going to be most on the early adopter leading edge of putting these practices in place? Is it the operators? Is it the technology companies, facility companies? Are they facility managers, technology managers? Who do you think is going to be the early adopters around these kind of methodologies?
The key one for me, what we're seeing is the enterprise themselves, the business. And for us, a lot of it's the financial institutions, because the opportunities for them to save millions and millions of dollars and reduce their energy and carbon at the same time is very rare. So if they can use that as a tracked metric and go, this is where we are and this is where we're going to be, they can then track what performance is going to look like and reduce their cost per transaction. So the enterprise is one of the ones that's really pushing it, because their customers want it. Their customers want them to show good financial due diligence. They want to show good environmental stewardship. And this is one way the IT teams get to be a real hero. So the key leaders in this, I think, are the enterprises, especially around the financial sector, pharma. That's what we see a lot of. And also, interesting enough, like the ones that normally lag behind, which is the government, are actually embracing this quite aggressively. Certainly the UK and Europe are going after there and saying, need a good baseline and I need a plan to improve year on year, because we need to demonstrate to our stakeholders and our clients, which is our local people, that we're doing the right things and getting better. So yeah, at the moment, public sector and finance seem to be leading the charge on this for quite similar reasons, reducing cost and making steps in the right direction to align with legislation. So yeah, early adopters, definitely those two.
And who do you think is most likely to be the internal champion or the head of the committee on this in a company? Is it a CFO that's leaning towards ESG? Is it a CTO? Or is it a completely different role that hasn't existed yet?
It's 90% of what we deal with. It's the CFO who's looking after the environmental aspect of the company as well, because they can see a great business decision that hits their other objectives. IT and transformation tend to be the ones that don't like it, because there's an element where there's scrutiny then going, why haven't you done this before? Because if we're seeing this huge opportunity for transformation, it shouldn't be that huge if you were really doing your job. And that's not fair to the technical teams, because the capability and requirement wasn't there before. But now it's there. They need to catch up and hurry up and go, we're going to be the ones speccing this and checking this and making sure it's right. But right now CFOs are all over this.
Super interesting. One final area I wanted to ask you about today is, and when you look into your crystal ball and you think 2 years out from now, how does your day-to-day, where you spend your time on, change over the next 24 months?
I think the next big step for us will be embedding what we do into the organization. So what we do as a consultancy and teaching people to look at this sort of stuff and look about it in detail. I think the majority of our role will be steering and keeping people on track. So if we do a good enough job educating people on the art of the possible, they'll start doing it themselves, and they'll just need nudges in the right direction. So it goes from kind of giving fish to teaching to fish, I guess, is how I kind of see the role developing. And we're seeing that naturally now, where we've got large organizations coming for us to help embed what we know into their teams so they can do it themselves, rather than, can we run a pilot, can we run a project, can you show us what to do? The next step is, how do you keep us on track as we do it? So moving from concept to implementation to then advisory, I think.
With education being a strong component of that.
The most important part, by a mile.
That's terrific. Rich, if someone wants to learn more about what you're working on or connect with you, is LinkedIn a great place to find you?
Yeah, LinkedIn's great, or you can see a lot of what we're doing on ResearchGate as well. So I actually publish 2 or 3 times a year, and we open source all the research we do into what we do. So there's a load of stuff coming up on storage and reusability and circular economy on storage that I'm working on with the CDI. There's a load of piece we're doing on sort of archival storage and hyperscale stuff that we're doing with TDS. So there's an awful lot of great opportunities to see what we're doing on LinkedIn or on ResearchGate, to actually read the papers and get a scientific view on some of these conversations.
And if someone wants to learn more about Interact, is your website the best place to direct them?
Yeah, interactdc.com, or message me on LinkedIn. Give me a shout and we can talk through it, because it's probably worth seeing, if I'm honest, because seeing is believing, isn't it?
Absolutely. Well, Rich, really appreciate this. It's been super insightful and informative to get your perspectives on what's going on with decarbonization, the circular economy, the role that hardware plays in all of this, and changing the belief systems that are necessary to make all of this a reality. I've been speaking with Rich Kenny, who's the managing director of Interact in the UK. And thanks again, Rich. Really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot. Speak to you soon.
Take care now.
The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com.